My name is Sarah Jolena Wolcott, and I want to share with you today a little bit about where this circular time calendar framework and workshop that I'm inviting you to join me in doing this year comes from. Where does this come from? So there's a couple, like so many times, there's many multiple origin points. If you've worked with me very much at all, you know I love talking about multiple origin points for anything really. So when I was first starting Sequoia Sammanvaya, and I was just graduated from seminary, I was living in this little tiny apartment in the South Bronx with a friend of mine, and I was terrified and so excited about launching this eco theology initiative, this company, and I really didn't know if it was going to work, right? Like, I had no one was backing me. I had all sorts of support, but I didn't have exactly like financial support. And I had just graduated from seminary. I had a lot of student loans, and I had a lot of stories. For me, those stories were hang-ups. If some people would call them hang-ups, but they're stories about who I was in the world that were no longer serving me as I was launching this new initiative. And so I was working with a mystical friend of mine, and she and I were kind of deepening into some spiritual meditative experience together in my little tiny bedroom apartment. And I just received these instructions from my spiritual guides as like a mystical experience about doing this particular form of lunar reflection. So every dark moon, I would sit down, I would draw a circle, and I would draw out the phases of the moon. And I would look at what had happened in those different lunar phases, and what did that mean for what was going on in my life, and how was spirit guiding me? Because that was my kind of core question, was how was spirit guiding me, and how was I learning to listen to spirit better while starting Sequoia Sammanvaya as a spiritual initiative. And as I did that, I received, like month after month, moon after moon, I received such powerful support, and I began to see how many of the stories that I had been telling myself were false. And I had to change some of my stories about myself based on what the data of my life was telling me. I come from a social science background. Before I went into theology, I'm kind of like an evidence-based person in certain ways. And I had to realize that some of the stories I had around, particularly around, like, what does it mean to be supported, were not entirely true. And later I was telling one of my students about this experience that I had, and she said, can you teach me how to do can you teach us how to do circular time calendars? And she happened to ask me this question in, I think it was like late November, early December. So we were moving into that year turning period. And I realized the easiest way to teach this process that I had developed was actually in the solar year, in the annual cycle. And since many people already do some sort of reflection in their annual cycle anyway, it just felt like a really great time to offer what I think of as year turning or solar reflections, your reflection of the earth circling the sun and your journey in that cycle. And so so then I started putting together the workbook. At first it was just a very large Google document with a couple of like hand-drawn images that I put in there. And then eventually it became like something much more elaborate. And very quickly I realized the importance of these times of getting people together to share their own circular calendars. And almost immediately I noticed that, and it was a kind of a combination of people shifting from what I call clock time, where they're only thinking about the clock and like those numbers on a dial, to earth time, because the cyclical calendars, both the lunar cycle and the solar cycle, help to re-engage or re-embed people in their ecology. So this process, and that process, the process of being connected to our ecology, the process of looking at our time as a cycle and not as a straight line, getting away from linear time and into cyclical time and earth time, that process is really, really, really old. That's one of the oldest things there is. It's one of the most basic ways that humans tell time. So on one level, this comes out of my own personal experience. And on another level, I'm just tapping into something that is as old as our humans and as old as we tell time. That's all. So when you're participating with this, it doesn't really matter what your faith background is or your own spiritual connection or where you physically are on the planet. We try to create something here that can meet you where you're at and that comes out of, at this point, hundreds of people's experiences of putting their own life and their own ecosystem into a cycle because it's already there. It already exists. All we're doing is giving you some extra tools and support to go to what is already there. And who knows, maybe in that process, you too are going to get to shift some stories that are no longer serving you. So that's a little bit about where this comes from.